ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ वाङ् मे मनसि प्रतिष्ठिता मनो मे वाचि प्रतिष्ठितम् आविराविर्मयेधि वेदस्य मणिस्थः सुतं मे मा प्रकाशीः अनेनाधीतेनाहोरात्रान् सन्दधामि ऋतं वदिष्यामि सत्यं वदिष्यामि तन्मामवतु तद्वक्तारमवतु अवतु माम् अवतु वक्तारमवतु वक्तारम्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरिः ॐ। May my speech be based on the spiritual truth. May my mind meditate on the import of the sacred bird. May the self-effulgent Brahman shine in me. May my mind and speech take me to the highest spiritual enlightenment. Om peace, peace, peace. We are continuing our discussion on Swami Vivekananda's contribution to religious thought and spirituality in general. Today I am going to speak something specifically on Swamiji's contribution to education, and there is a special reason for that, because Swamiji's views on education are so distinctive, because he considers religion, or to be more precise, spirituality, the spiritual unfoldment of the human personality, as the core principle of educational process. Though Swami Vivekananda cannot be categorized as an educational thinker in the conventional sense of the term, but still you find he has made some unique and distinct contribution to educational thoughts, and that places him in a category of his own. His ideas on education in many ways as radical, and I think they are more relevant today than they were relevant during his time when he delivered those thoughts. In a way, the fact that he is not a conventional educationist who can be called an education in the sense John Locke or any of the even later day modern educationists like Tagore or Gandhi in the context of India, or even the modern education thinkers of Western world like Montessori and others, still you find it is rather an advantage that Swamiji is not one of those conventional educationists, because the conventional educationists often run the risk of getting trapped in the prevailing contemporary educational paradigms of their own times. So they often lose sight of the larger picture of the unfoldment of the human personality, which should be the ultimate goal, the ultimate end of all educational process. Secondly, many of the conventional educationists give importance to education at the scientific and technological level, or if you are talking about the earlier educational thinkers, education at the level of imparting the religious doctrines of a particular religious tradition. But Swamiji is focusing on the spiritual unfoldment of the human personality, irrespective of the person's faith system or his belief systems. Because he could see some of the problems, some of the defects of the education system of which he himself was a product. Because he went to college, he went to school in the 1870s. He was born in the year 1863, and he went to his earlier school, primary education, in the late 1860s, and he went to college in the late 1870s. And in fact, in 1881, he was a student of the General Assembly's matriculation education system that's now known as Scottish Church College, which was run by the Scottish Missionary Organization in Calcutta. Now, one of the prevalent educational ideas that dominated education institutions of those times was the concept of this tabula rasa. So that's something very interesting, and we can find in Vivekananda certain ideas which actually repudiate and reject this concept of tabula rasa, which is an important doctrine that perhaps goes back to the early Aristotelian concepts and later Aquinas, and in modern times, more specifically, it was an idea projected by the empiricist John Locke. We will come to that later. Now, what was the educational landscape, the cultural and intellectual landscape in which Vivekananda grew as a student? It would be very interesting to have a look at the whole picture. He was born, as I said earlier, in the year 1863, and then Charles Darwin had already published his classic The Origin of the Species in 1858. That is almost 5 years before Vivekananda's birth. And Darwinian concept of evolution actually was a big challenge to the religious schools, the schools and colleges run by the Christian missionary institutions in Europe and India in the 1860s and 70s, because educated people, including students like Vivekananda, had already become acquainted with the work of Darwin by the time he had gone for his BA, that is Bachelor of Arts course in Calcutta. And then, of course, an equally important event that took place during those times that actually had a great influence in Europe and in India, and also in the eastern states, the east coast of America, was the publication, the first volume of Das Kapital, Karl Marx classic on socio-economic political theory. The first volume was published in the year 1867. And the second volume came up in 1885. And that was the time when Vivekananda was already preparing to become a monk. Sri Ramakrishna passed away in the year 1886. And that was the time when Swami Vivekananda had decided to become a monk. So, the first volume of Karl Marx Das Kapital had already become popular among the students and the teachers of the Scottish Church College, which is now known as Scottish Church College. But at that time, when Vivekananda was a student, it was known as General Assembly's Institution. It was run by the Scottish General Missionary Board in Calcutta, which still stands as one of the prominent education institutions of the city of Calcutta. It is known as the Scottish Church College. Vivekananda was a student in that college in the year 1881. And R.C. Majumdar, one of the prominent historians of modern India, writes something very interesting. That gives us a picture of the intellectual climate in which these students went to college and studied and debated and discussed important events. R.C. Majumdar writes that students and also some so-called enlightened teachers used to hold in their hands copies of Charles Darwin and the first volume of Das Kapital. They may not have read them, but they were very proud to own a copy of the Origin of Species and the first volume of Karl Marx Das Kapital, which was published in 1867. So this was the intellectual climate. So a challenge to establish religious concepts like Genesis, the idea that God created this world, the idea that God is the one who takes care of us, these ideas were being challenged in the debating societies of the elite institutions of India, and also much more prominently in the big universities of Europe like Oxford, Cambridge and so on. This was the intellectual climate in which Vivekananda studied and became familiar with the works of Spencer, Mill, Locke and others, Immanuel Kant and others, Hegel. Swamiji quotes from all these great Western thinkers in his lectures and sometimes in his letters, in fact. Now, one of the prominent educational ideas that dominated, that defined the educational system, not officially, but these ideas were very much prevalent in those days, was the concept of tabula rasa, that's clean state theory, which actually goes back to St. Thomas Aquinas, though you find this idea was evolved even in ancient times in Greek philosophy of Stoic school. In Stoic epistemology also emphasizes that the mind starts as blank. And again, even the 11th century, this theory of tabula rasa was developed more clearly by the Persian philosopher, his name is Avicenna. Aquinas, of course, gave much more importance. So Aquinas brought this Aristotelian and Avicenna notions to the forefront of Christian thought. And in fact, he contradicted the old Platonian theory, because Plato believed that a child's mind is not an empty slate. It as an entity, it pre-existed somewhere in the heavens. This was the belief. That was the idea of Plato. Which in fact, he was the predecessor to Aristotle. And so in that sense, Aristotle contradicted Plato, and Aquinas, and later John Locke, the empiricist philosopher, also took up this tabula rasa theory. And he says that, the human mind is, though it possesses the potential of awareness, still the mind is empty. It has no content. That was the idea of tabula rasa, that is the white paper or the empty slate. So the idea was that you can impress whatever you want on the child's mind, because at birth a child's mind has no content. The mind is blank. It's just like a camera or a computer which is waiting to be programmed. So what about the ultimate end of education or human evolution? Whatever ideas you give to a child, accordingly the child evolves and develops and progresses. The problem with such an idea was that is totally devoid of humanizing elements. Such an attempt, such an approach to educational process can help you to become a valuable economic product. You can acquire some kind of an economic value, but it doesn't give scope for the progression and evolution of the true human potential. That was the problem of this tabula rasa theory. Now, Vivekananda was familiar with all these ideas. So, the reason why I am pointing out this background of Vivekananda's his own educational training when he went to school and college. The reason is, when Vivekananda talks about the importance of some Upanishadic or Vedic ideas of education, we should not get away with the impression that he was living in some ancient world. He was trying to emphasize some ancient educational values which are found in the Upanishadic or Vedic text. No. He was doing it with the full awareness of the drawbacks of the education system that's built upon the foundation of John Locke's theory of tabula rasa, because it also rejects the higher potential in every human being. According to the Upanishadic concept, the Vedic concept, every child is born with a huge bundle of samskaras, with a huge bundle of great ideas, great potentialities, spiritual and also secular. If a child goes to an engineering college, if he becomes a great engineer, that's because his inherent perfection or potential is oriented in the direction of acquiring engineering skills. So also any other secular skill. But beyond all that, there are some higher possibilities that help the child not only to acquire skills and expertise, but also acquire higher wisdom. So the Upanishadic system of education that Swami Vivekananda expounded contained the scope for a child not only to acquire skills and knowledge, but also the ability to convert that knowledge into scholarship, and the scholarship into wisdom. Thereby you can evolve from instinct, going through reason, and eventually you can get inspiration and you can develop insight into the fundamental value of human life, its worth, its significance, and its a higher spiritual goal. Now, this is totally absent in any system of education that is built upon the concept of tabula rasa. Because the education institutions that functioned in the early decades of 20th century and it began to function in the later half of 19th century actually were designed to help the student, the child, to get information and then knowledge, and then use that information and knowledge for making life more comfortable without any emphasis as to how a person can and should make use of that knowledge and that information for acquiring higher wisdom. That's why Swamiji's his contribution is very extensive, because there are several definitions that you find in Vivekananda. But the most prominent definition that Vivekananda gives to education is the manifestation of perfection already in man. Now, this definition is very close to his definition of religion. Religion is the manifestation of divinity already in man. So what's the difference between perfection and divinity? Perfection can be a term that may be used with regard to any skill, any tool that you may learn, that you may master in your everyday life. An engineer, a doctor, or a mechanic, or a pilot, anyone. All these skills are important. So you can reach the highest degree of perfection. If the inner innate potential is directed in one direction, it takes you perfection in one area. Now, of course, the concept of tabula rasa also recognizes that there is this potential, but it says that the content is empty. That is the main difference between Vivekananda's definition of education as perfection already in every human being and the well-known concept of tabula rasa, especially expounded by John Locke and before him in St. Thomas Aquinas. So here in Vivekananda what he says is there is a gradual unfolding of what is already present in every child. So he says that therefore the only duty of the teacher in both cases is to remove all obstructions from the way. Hands off, as I always say, and everything will be all right. That is, our duty is to clear the way and the Lord does the rest. I shall try to explain this definition of Vivekananda in the light of some of the Upanishadic parables. Now, we should remember every individual as in its himself perfection. It lies within the dark recesses of his physical being. Now, there is an interesting sutra in Patanjali's yoga aphorisms. The sutra comes in the 4th chapter. It's called Kaivalyapada, the 3rd sutra. Sutra is Nimittam Aprayojagam Prakrudinam Varana Bhedastu Tataha Kshetrigavad. This is the sutra. Nimittam Aprayojagam Prakrudinam Varana Bhedastu Tataha Kshetrigavad. Now, what it means is, every attempt to, in the context of education especially, every attempt to teach somebody, to educate a person, is like removing the obstacle, removing the problems that stand in the way of that person's natural unfolding of his own real potential. Of course, in the commentaries, Vivekananda himself uses this, and also you find the traditional commentaries. Suppose you want to irrigate a field, and there is a river or a pond nearby, so let's say half a mile away. But the field is dry, and you want to irrigate the field. So you have to cut a canal to link to. You have to cut a link between the field to be irrigated and the canal, and of course and the river. You cut a canal. So when you cut a canal or a tunnel, what you are doing is you are removing the soil, the mud of that part of the earth, which later is called a canal. So you remove that soil, then what happens is the water starts flowing through the canal to the field. You did not do anything except removing the obstacle, that is the mud or soil in that part of the earth, and the water starts flowing to the field. Suppose you are given a huge block of granite stone and you are asked to you're asked to make a sculpture of Buddha or any image. What do? You use the tools, you chisel out all the unnecessary parts of the granite block. And when you do that, you get the picture of a Buddha. So what you did actually was nothing but removing the unnecessary parts, which were really like the obstacles in the manifestation, in the path of manifestation of Buddha's image. This is true in the case of a child. So, in other words, the tool or the system or the process that only helps somebody to realize that person's inherent perfection, inherent possibility or potential, because perfection as such is our nature. It is our real nature. And it is obscured, it is concealed or veiled by some external forces. You remove them, you remove those obstacles, then you can help that person to unfold his own inner potential. That's why Vivekananda says, you cannot teach a child any more than you can grow a plant. So what do? You plant a seed, you pour water, and you do all that is needed. It sprouts, it becomes a plant. So all the obstacles in the form of lack of water, lack of other soil, these obstacles are removed when you planted the seed in a soil and watered that, then becomes a plant. Now, like that, Vivekananda says, education is the manifestation of perfection, the full potential in every human being. So what does this really mean? It means a child has already acquired samskaras, impressions, vrittis, memories, certain tendencies and characteristics. Because the child has been living in his previous life cycles, acquiring samskaras. So we should remember Vivekananda's definition of education as a manifestation of perfection already in all of us should be and can be understood only in the context of the law or the doctrine of karma and the doctrine of reincarnation or the doctrine of multiple birth cycles. So what it means is, we have all acquired various samskaras, good samskaras and bad samskaras, good impressions and bad impressions, good tendencies and bad tendencies, which manifest in our personality. We can't help it. That's our inheritance, the inheritance that we have brought with us when we were born. Now, if a child is provided good education, along with expertise, knowledge and information, skills in secular areas, secular branches like engineering or medicine, whatever it is, along with that, the child also should be given training in higher spiritual values, which are beyond the realm of the secular. Because the child has got in his mental system that he has inherited from his previous life, not only the ability to acquire perfection in secular skills, but also higher samskaras which are waiting to manifest. You should give the child proper opportunities. If a child reads a great book, gets good education in spiritual values, then spiritual samskaras, higher spiritual tendencies which are already accumulated in his mental system will find expression. Then, along with technical skills and expertise, the child also will become a wonderful human being. Suppose a child is given religious education, spiritual education, the child also will acquire higher values. We have to remember, when Vivekananda talks about spiritual values in education, we should always remember, he is not actually talking about one particular specific religious system, faith system or anything. What he is talking about, higher values, compassion, love for everyone, non-violence. Mostly some of those values which are taught in the Patanjali system, yamas or niyamas, non-violence, non-possessiveness, no desire for acquiring things that belong to others, and also a tendency, a love for leading a good, pure life, and also a tendency to develop contentment, purity, all these values, which are universal values, which every child should be made acquainted with, along with giving secular education, technical education, scientific education, education in scientific and technical skills. Because the child is born not with an empty slate, not with a white, empty, blank paper. The child is born with a slate in which many things are written. What are those writings? Samskaras, impressions, tendencies, acquired and accumulated in previous life cycles. There are many good samskaras, good impressions, and also there may be, unfortunately, some unpleasant, undesirable tendencies as well. So when you give a child, a student, some acquaintance with higher spiritual values, stories of great saints, higher universal spiritual values, love, like looking after the whole humanity as one spiritual family, looking for the threads of unity and harmony behind and beyond the apparent diversities and pluralities. These higher values should be introduced in educational system. That's why Swamiji says, every child is full of infinite possibilities, both spiritual and secular. So training and education should be given at both levels. Then what happens? Education as a manifestation of perfection already in us, already in man, that is Swamiji's definition, becomes a reality. And then what happens? The child is able to harmonize and integrate whatever knowledge or skills that he or she acquires. And then his higher samskaras and tendencies and impressions will get purified and sublimated. So in this journey or evolution or growth or progression, there is a movement, that is, there is a gradual evolution from information to knowledge, from knowledge to scholarship, and from scholarship to wisdom. A lot of disconnected, non-integrated bits of contradictory pieces of information will only create confusion. When these bits of information are organized, we call it knowledge. When this knowledge goes deeper and becomes an internal part of our rational thinking system, thought system, it's called scholarship. And when we come to know, when we get an idea as to how to make use of what we have learned, how to make use of the information, the knowledge and the scholarship that we have acquired, the expertise, the technical skill that we have acquired, how to make proper use of it, and how to avoid making improper use of it. That power of discretion, the discerning skill is called wisdom with the capital letter W. That is an evolution from instinct, then to reason, then to higher inspiration, and eventually intuition, because intuition is the natural, effortless way of making use of wisdom. That is called intuition. This is the path of unfolding of the inner possibilities of perfection that is present in all of us. This requires expertise and training, not only in technical skills, but also in the areas of humanities, mysticism, spiritual values, and so on. And Vivekananda says it is a must, it is the only remedy for sustaining higher values in our culture, in our civilization, in our society. Of course, today we are living in a different era. Our times are in many ways different from the age in which Vivekananda articulated these views and presented before the entire world. But remember, certain apparent differences are there, but the overall picture of humanity, the overall picture of the educational process remains actually the same, almost identical in our times. Of course, in those days, there was this blind rush for reason, technology, because science and technology had already started exploring in so many different ways when Vivekananda spoke. But today, perhaps we are living in a different era, this tyranny of the practical, the domination of utilitarian ultra-pragmatism, the tendency to judge everything by its functional value. To what extent our knowledge and skills are useful for making life more comfortable, or sometimes, unfortunately, for the tendency to make use of our skills for exclusively defense purposes. That is the age in which we are living. These things may be necessary, but what is important is for the survival of human civilization, for the survival of the higher cultural values, we need something else. And for that we need training of higher values, training for those potentials which are already present in all of us, which frequently do not get any expression, any training in modern education system, which is exclusively result-oriented, purely functional, and purely profit-oriented and utilitarian in their scope and in their plans and programs. So, of course, Vivekananda was living in an age when the industrial age had already started making progress in mechanization, but still things have not reached the present level, because there were still many educationists who thought of the relevance of higher values in education. But today, especially in the age of information technology and artificial intelligence, things are getting much more utilitarian, much more functional, the domination of the practical. Now, when Vivekananda spoke about the unfolding of perfection that is present in all of us, or divinity that is present in all of us, one may very well wonder, is some kind of, you feel a disconnect for those of us. Maybe in modern time there are many educational thinkers who may share these views, but the majority of modern educationists may not share our enthusiasm for introducing spiritual values in our education system. That's because when we talk about spiritual values, they often misinterpret it as bringing some kind of religious doctrines or dogmas. That's precisely what Vivekananda was not talking about. Swami Vivekananda was not talking about bringing religious doctrines or dogmas into education system. I can give an example which Vivekananda himself had given. There are many interesting such episodes in the ancient Upanishadic text. I can give one example. The one story appears in the Chandogya Upanishad. In the Chandogya Upanishad, there is a great teacher. His name was Gautama, and a great student. His name was Satyakama. So Satyakama was a simple boy living with his poor mother. They were very poor people. But the child had a desire to study philosophy, spiritual ideas, and so on. So he heard about a great teacher of those times, and the teacher's name was Gautama. So he got his mother's permission and went to Gautama, and he got initiated into the study of the Upanishads of higher wisdom. Now, the teacher here is not giving a series of lectures to the student. What he did was something very interesting. He had many cows in his hermitage. So he selected some 400 cows, which were famished cows, not well fed, and they were in need of special care. So Gautama asked this new student, that is Satyakama, you come here, you take away these 400 cows. You take them to nearby forests. You take care of them, feed them, see that they get enough grass to eat. You should feed them, give them drinking water. You take care of them. And when they, of course, some of those cows were young cows, but still not well fed. So Satyakama took all these 400 cows to the forest. And the guru, the teacher, that Gautama had instructed him, when the total number reaches 1,000, then you come back. That was the instruction. So this boy, Satyakama, remember, this is a mythological story. It's a parable found in the Chandogya Upanishad, one of the earliest Vedantic texts that perhaps belongs to 3rd or 4th millennium BC. And many European Indologists have translated many of these portions of the Upanishads into European languages, not only English, to German, to French and other languages. And the first series of translations began in the later half of 18th century. So that is the heritage, that is the greatness of these parables. So you can find Schopenhauer, Hume, Winter Nietzsche, Colebrook, Keith, many of them have commented upon some of these very interesting parables and their educational value. So this child, Satyakama, began taking care of these 400 cows with great attention. He looked after them, and in a short, maybe in a few years, the number reached 1,000. They got multiplied because they were well cared for, well looked after. And then Gautama started his journey back to his guru's home, guru's hermitage, because that was the instruction the guru had given him. When the number reaches 1,000, you come back. And Gautama started his journey back to his guru's home. As he started moving towards his guru's home, something interesting happened. One big bull appeared from among these 1,000 cattle and started teaching him some higher spiritual values. So the story goes, 1/4 of the supreme wisdom was taught to Satyagama by the bull. And after some time, he was one day doing his fire sacrifice, which the ancient Aryan sages in India used to do the fire sacrifice every day, morning and evening. One day Satyagama had already retired the cows, and the evening he was sitting under a tree performing his oblations. He started a small fire, began to offer mantras, sitting in front of the fire. He felt somebody from the fire appeared and taught him another quarter of the spiritual wisdom that he was seeking to learn from his teacher. So the bull gave him one quarter and the fire gave him another quarter. After some time, a swan appeared. A hamsa is called in the Upanishads. A bird, a special kind of auspicious bird appeared. And the swan began to expound some higher philosophy. That was the third quarter of spiritual wisdom. And after some time, after some days, a bird appeared, a diver bird appeared and gave him a long exposition. So what it means is, as Gautama instructed, the student Satyagama listened very carefully with a lot of honesty, sincerity, what we call shraddha, and a sense of sanctity, and he practiced, he obeyed the instructions of his teacher to the letter. As a result of this, from his own mind, he heard these divine voices. So, as a metaphor, the Upanishad says, the bull appeared and taught him, then fire appeared and taught him, then the swan appeared, then the diver bird appeared. That's the Upanishad's way of putting it. What it means is, as this student Satyagama went on doing his work with total sincerity, his own mind began to change. His mind began to evolve. It began to become more and more sublime, more and more quiet. His mind became so spiritual, so tranquil, so peaceful. In that process, the inner wisdom that is already there within him began to evolve and began to unfold, and he became a man of spiritual realization. This is a very interesting story you find in the Chandogya Upanishad. Again, you find in the Taittiriya Upanishad, a student, his name is Bhrigu. One day he went to his teacher, it was his own father, Varuna, and asked him, please teach me the highest spiritual wisdom. So the father told him, you think of all these empirical things. Annam pranam chakshusrotram manovachamidi yato va imani bhudani jayande yena jatani jivande yet praindhabhisam visandi tad vijijñāsasva tad brahma. That is the mantra goes. The teacher tells the student, you think of this whole universe, all these trees and mountains and valleys, your mind, the senses, everything. Where do they come from? What sustains them? And eventually, where do they get dissolved? What is the central, the essence of all this? You meditate, and one day you realize. So Bhrigu began to meditate. First he thought, by mistake he thought, everything is material, matter. Then he thought everything is vital energy. Then he thought it's mind, then intellect. And eventually he realized that there is one supreme truth. Now, this story may appear to be a bit too allegorical. But remember, all great teachings are given in a very allegorical style, using parables and metaphors. What you find here is, in modern context, when we put in the mind of a student some higher spiritual values, what happens is, his own inner potential, that he has a big storehouse of spiritual tendencies and impressions gathered in previous life cycles. They begin to express themselves, they begin to unfold, they begin to manifest, and the student will eventually evolve into a spiritual being. This potential is there. We should not limit our education exclusively to scientific, technological, or empirical material level, or still worse, giving the child a set of dogmas in the name of religious education. Both are lopsided, and both fail to meet the ultimate end of genuine education. This is a very important point to remember. If you give a child religious education in the form of a set of dogmas and doctrines to be blindly believed, then the child in modern times will not accept, because times have changed. But we must put to the child, we must put in the mind of the child some higher spiritual values, which in a way constitute the common spiritual heritage of all the finest teachings of world religions. Not an exclusive monopoly of one particular faith system, but higher spiritual values are found in all religious traditions. They should be presented to the child, the student, in a very non-dogmatic manner. Then you find students will accept these higher values. Let us look at the story. Gautama must have been given some other technical skills also by the teacher. Satyagama. Satyagama must have received some higher instruction in some other skills from the teacher Gautama. Satyagama is the student, Gautama is the teacher. But after instructing all these, Gautama, the teacher, told the child, the student, now you take these 400 cows, take to the forest, look after them. Apparently, it's just a physical work, taking care of the cows. But the student was so pure, and he began to follow the teacher's instruction to the letter and spirit with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. Then what happens? Because of his dedication to the work that he was given, his mind began to evolve. His mind began to become pure and pure. So, from within his own mind, he heard this wisdom, these words of wisdom. That's what is given allegorically as words coming from bull, swan, fire, diver bird, and so on. Similarly, in modern times, students should be taught that they have the potential in their system to become not only an expert engineer, but also a good human being. That is very important. Any amount of technical skill or even scholarly achievements will be absolutely of no use unless the person is given some instruction to become a good human being. And when you become a good human being, then if you are also a great engineer, you are able to make use of engineering skill or whatever skill you may have got for your good and for the good of others. And along with that, you also will have a sense of contentment, a sense of inner satisfaction, a sense of inner perfection, inner completeness. That is the real value of spiritual education of spiritual values. Again, I must emphasize, it is not education of a particular religion and its dogmas, because that has created a lot of problems. That's why in many Western countries they had to constitutionally emphasize the point there should be a separation between church and state, because the church became a liability where the church limited its education to dogmatic doctrinal education. Going beyond that, every religious institution, every religious organization should teach some universal spiritual values. Then the student will be able to not only acquire skills, but also will be able to acquire the wisdom to make proper use of those skills. You find many such ideas that came from Vivekananda. You find influenced great men in India like Rabindranath Tagore, Mahatma Gandhi, and others. Actually, Tagore believed in the importance of teaching some artistic skills, and Gandhi believed in the importance of dedication to some manual skills. He believed that if you acquire this quality of dedication and sense of sanctity, along with skills, that will help you to unfold and to manifest your inner spiritual potential. This is one important aspect of Vivekananda's educational ideas. That puts him in his own category, in a special category of his own. Of course, during the post-World War days, paradigms have changed, needs and challenges have changed. We have new challenges, new needs in modern times. But many of these ideas that Vivekananda gave to the world more than 120 years back are still relevant, maybe more relevant today than they were during his own time. Because they need to be applied to modern education scenario in every possible way. We have to remember the well-known statement of the great 4th century Roman theologian Ambrose. He says, "It had not pleased God to give his people salvation in dialectic. Dialectics cannot give salvation. Along with dialectics, we should give spiritual food for our emotions, feelings, and mind. Then only the inner potential will manifest." That's what the words of the great Roman theologian implies, actually speaking. So, in a way, Vivekananda's education philosophy helps us to harmonize our own personality, our own multidimensional personality, going beyond the dimension of getting good education and the next dimension of acquiring some kind of economic value that will help us to live a successful life in this world, and above all that, to be a productive member of the community in general. That's what Swami Vivekananda puts before us, the unique educational paradigm. And also it puts some higher ideal before us, beyond the ideal of success in education. The problem in today's education system is we put before the students these two categories, the failure and the success. The fear of failure and the glory of success. That we should evolve an alternate paradigm. There is nothing wrong in failure if we can acquire some spiritual qualities. There is no glory in success if success only means acquiring some technical skill which may help us to make a lot of money, but we may be doomed if we make a lot of money, and that's the only meaning of success. But then we can't get 4 hours sleep without taking sleeping pills. Or in the process of acquiring the piling up these billions of dollars, a person becomes a mental and physical wreck. That success is not real success. Vivekananda's concept of education places before us unique, harmonious paradigm. That is, we should acquire technical skills, scientific skills, skills that are needed to live a happy, secular life in this world. But along with that, some higher spiritual values that will help us to make use of the good results of our own effort, our own education. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.